Valve has been in the news a lot lately. Most recently is because of the price raises on the Steam Deck, but beyond that, they've also recently introduced new hardware, such as the new Steam controller. This is the old one. This weird alien. Ugh. I love this thing, but it's also a piece of shit. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about one of the other things they announced. That thing. Valve still hasn't announced pricing as of me recording this video, so I figured it would be fun to kind of sit down and actually talk about what the potential pricing and performance profile of this thing can be. We actually have enough information to where we can pretty readily ballpark the performance profile. The question then becomes, well, what are they going to sell it for? So figure we can talk about that here. And in order to commemorate the very special occasion of me just standing in front of a whiteboard and yapping for a while, I have a slide deck. I'm prepared. So let's dive into it. Let's just talk about the Steam Machine for a little bit here. So I want to take everybody back to 2025, where Valve actually posted this blog post, and they also posted a companion video talking about how they are introducing Steam hardware, which we already knew one entry for the Steam Deck, but they are now introducing three other categories. We have the Steam Machine, the Steam controller, and the Steam frame. Steam frame is going to be its own video. I have my own thoughts and feelings and conjecture about that, but that's all thoughts and feelings. This is facts. This is data. I got math, baby. No, today we are just talking about the Gabe Cube and all that entails. Again, specifically, I want to really focus on the price, and in order to figure out where it will land on the price scale, there's a bunch that we have to look at. We're going to look at performance data. We're going to look at logistical data. We're going to look at tariffs. We're going to do a bunch of calculations. Whenever this thing first announced, already we were going through some issues with the RAM shortage. So I was already bearish about the Steam Machine. So this is just a collection of screenshots from Discord conversations that I've had over the last few months. Talking about the Steam Machine. My favorite is the one with during TGA, during the Jeffies. If you were there, I'm sorry. I'm gonna pour one out with you. I was there too. I was in the trenches. Not my finest hour. Fucking Titanfall 3 bait and switch, motherfucker. But why now? Why are we talking about all of this now? What has changed that I'm making this video now rather than 6 months ago? Well, I didn't make the video 6 months ago because I straight up just didn't understand. But now the price raises have gotten so crazy that I absolutely, now it's like, before it was, well, I can imagine some people will buy it even if it's expensive just because it's the Steam Machine. Now it's, I literally have no idea who's going to buy it. So, but there's also some questions about if the launch is actually going to happen soon, and I genuinely believe that it is. According to this article from The Verge, Valve across April 30th to May 1st imported about 50 tons of game consoles. Now, this is important because of the site that was used to track them. So this is the English version of nbd.ltd. It's an e-commerce or a physical commerce logistical hub kind of thing. I don't have a subscription for it, so I'm limited in what I can see. So I only have this screenshot of the last like 30 days or so for Valve Corporation. But it's important because you can see on here the 430 shipment that The Verge reported on is still here present in this data. And beyond that, there's 6 total shipments on this list that include game console. Now, my opinion is that we are looking at a combination of things here. So according to The Verge's math in this article, which I would recommend you go read, according to their math, if we assume that these shipments are just Steam machines, which is an easy assumption to make, because we know how the shipping containers work. So you get, I think they're 40-foot metal shipping containers that you can put on a boat, and I forget how many you get per boat, but it's, you have like a fixed amount of space, right? And within those containers, you can only pack so many physical items. Like you have boxes that you need to put in your container. If you can only fit 40,000 boxes in your container, then 40,000 boxes is as much as you can have. And then the weight is just dependent on what's in those boxes, right? So using that math, The Verge was able to determine that the contents of these freighters is actually lighter than what the contents of a known Steam Deck delivery freighter was. So that tells us that these are new products. What that doesn't tell us is what they are. Now, at first I had theories that maybe Valve was kind of just lying about what was in them in order to protect the Steam controller launch date. But then I thought about it more and I'm like, well, no, actually it makes sense for this to be a combination of Steam frames and Steam machines that are in this data. And just going off of, I mean, literally just thinking about it for a second, if Valve is going to launch these things, they've advertised them all together, they've announced them all together, they clearly intend to launch them all together. There might be a time period delay between the two, but they are intended to launch at the same time. I believe, from just looking at this data, that we likely have about a 2-to-1 ratio of Steam machines to Steam frames in the US, maybe even a 3-to-1 ratio. But a 2-to-1 sounds safe to me, because a Steam frame is a kind of Halo product. It's gonna be something that people are gonna buy no matter what the price is, because there's nothing else in the market that's like it. It's a Gen 1 product. Steam machine, on the other hand, is going to face a ton of competition as soon as it arrives. So it's got to be very price competitive, and it's got to be aware of its surroundings, or else it's just not going to find a market. So it makes sense for them to allocate some of their manufacturing run to the Steam frame. The question is, how much of it is actually the Steam frame versus everything else? According to the numbers that The Verge did in this article, it's looking like there's, according to this 31st to the first shipment, there's approximately 20,000 Steam machines or less that are in the US. So if we combine all these multiple shipments together, we can paint approximately 60,000 units if they were all Steam machines, or we can do 40,000 Steam machines, 20,000 frames. I don't know what the frame rate is in order to do this math, and like I said, I don't have a paid account here, so I can't actually look at the details. This is all very, very, very possible. So with that in mind, that means that they're stocking up. That means that they are gearing up and ready to launch. It's not going to be a great launch, but they are gearing up and they're getting ready for it. So now that we have some evidence that this is actually around the corner, we should try to find something that is comparable to the Steam machine, I think. It's helpful for price to performance if you have something to compare it to, because if your thing outperforms your competitor by double, then you can theoretically charge double, right? Because you're getting twice as much done with whatever. So we need to find something that's a similar performance profile, and then we can use that data and extrapolate from there and try to find the price. So I've thought about this long and hard. I've done a lot of comparisons, and I'm pretty sure I went out and I found a system builder, and I'm pretty sure that this computer is as one-to-one to the Steam machine as we're going to get, at least before release. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce you to the GabeCube's competitor. I can already tell what your comment's going to be. Go ahead and leave it down below. I'll give you some time. It's fine. I have math. We'll talk about it. So we have a gigantic, massive spreadsheet here, or database, whatever the fuck you want to call this thing. Basically just comparing every single known data point. All of this information will be in an article. I'll put a link in the description so you can read it after the fact, but we're just going to kind of go through this and break it down piece by piece. I'm going to start with the more boring, mundane stuff. It's like RAM, storage, whatever. Then we'll move on to CPU and GPU. The Steam machine has a typical computer architecture in terms of its memory. It's got your DRAM for system, and then it's got GDDR RAM for the GPU. It's got 16 megs of system, or 16 gigs of system, and 8 gigs of graphics memory. This is different than the Steam Deck and the PS5. The PS5 and the Steam Deck have unified memory architecture, which means that the system can dynamically allocate, okay, this chunk is for VRAM, this chunk is for system memory. So if you have a section of the game that's more like object dependent, you can load more objects and keep track of more things if you want to, and just drop texture detail quietly, and like nobody will really notice. This is a little different than something like the PS3, which was a hardcore 256 split. At the time, the 360 would let you dynamically allocate things. So these two memory architectures are very common, and they're very established, very battle-worn technologies. According to some leaks on the Steam machine, it's looking like it's going to come in with 4 SKUs. There's going to be a 512 and a 1 terabyte model, and then those same models with Steam controllers. So if we have a 512 gig and a 1 terabyte hard drive, well, that's a direct comparison to the PlayStation 5. PlayStation 5 has a custom, well, at least the launch model had a custom one. I don't know if it's using the same custom one now. But the launch model that we're talking about has a custom 825 gigabyte. I believe it would be Gen 4. It would be Gen 4x4. And it's a 2280 drive. It's 825 unformatted. You format it, it drops down to like 600 gigs, something like that. I'm wondering if they picked 825 just because that's the way like the math of like the individual NAND chips would work on the board for the SSD. I don't know. I'm sure there's some math reason why that worked out the way it was. Yields were bad that year or something. Beyond the actual SSD that's custom, they also have a controller SSD an SSD controller that's on board that has 512 megabytes of DRAM, DDR4. I bring this up because that is more complexity, more silicon, more RAM, more expensive to produce. And then there's also other things like obviously like the case is like humongous on the PS5 compared to how small this thing is going to be. As we can see in these screenshots, I believe these screenshots also came from The Verge. Verge is just doing great journalism today. So as we can see, the bottom of the unit, it's got slots for both 2230 and 2280 NVMe drives, and it looks like they're going to be pretty usable, replaceable. It looks like you just unscrew the feet, and the bottom pops off, and you can replace the drive, which is awesome. I'd love to see that kind of stuff. What I don't love to see is what's in this other photo. So you can kind of see, it's hard to tell. This is the best photo that I was able to get. But so this is the front of the unit, and you can tell because of the USB ports and the micro SD card reader. But you can also see that there's like 1/3 of an inch of like aluminum metal cooling plate that's actually fused to the PCB. And then everything on top of that is just fin stacks and copper heat pipes and then the fan, right? So there's no vertical clearance for replaceable, removable RAM. So I'm pretty sure the RAM is going to be soldered onto the thing itself, which kind of sucks. Kind of really sucks. Being able to pop 32 gigs of RAM into this thing would be an easy win long-term for upgradability, but maybe Valve is making the bet that doesn't actually matter because of how small the thing is and the cooling, and that part's more important. And by the time you actually want to upgrade this thing, it's not keeping up. I don't know what the logic there is, but I don't like it. But at the same time, I understand it. It's sometimes you just have to deal with the realities of your product, right? So let's talk about the CPU. CPU is where it starts to get interesting. So the PS5 CPU is 2 full generations older. It is RDNA 2. Technically, it came out before RDNA 2. There's a lot of speculation that the design that Sony wanted in the silicon is a lot of the design that went into RDNA. Like they were building, I keep saying RDNA 2. Zen 2, whenever they were building Zen 2, it's very likely that Sony had some architectural like input into that affected the architecture as a whole. PS5 has 2 extra cores and 4 extra threads compared to the machine's 6-core 12-thread design. Now that will mean that your single-threaded and your multi-threaded numbers will be different. There will be a performance differential there, but we're about to dive into that. According to these leaked Geekbench 6 numbers, you can see Valve Fremont on the left-hand side. Please note that this is an engineering sample, and also it was taken a year ago, and it was on Windows. So it's using probably a weird custom driver that AMD compiled, and it's on a test board somewhere that's just on an open bench somewhere. So these numbers aren't really comparable to real-life performance values. And also there's probably BIOS bugs and whatever that they were working out. But this is a good, decent ballpark, right? And looking at the ballpark, we can see that the single core performance is fantastic compared to the PS5s. It's double. So instructions per clock on each individual core, it's roughly double. Now, your multi-core is where things take a hit. They actually work out to be about the same. So how is this going to translate into your performance in games? Well, actually, this is actually a really good situation. This means that in CPU-bound games, the Steam machine is straight up going to outperform the PS5. And that's a lot of the problems that the PS5 has, is CPU grunt. It is limited a little bit on the GPU side, but a lot of the slowdowns and bottlenecks that we have are just because of the CPU nowadays. Now, the multi-core score working out to be about the same is a little suspicious. And because of this, I have reasons to believe that we can talk more about this when we get to the GPUs, but I have reasons to believe that Valve basically went to AMD, pointed at the PS5 and said, we want that. Like these numbers, like they were able to cut a few cores off because of the efficiency gains from moving to Zen 4 and the 4-nanometer architecture as opposed to a 7-nanometer architecture. So they were able to use those gains and make up performance, which is really super cool. Like I love to see that. That also means that theoretically in games that are heavily GPU bound, the additional single thread performance will help the driver perform a little better. So you might actually be able to get higher frame rates in your competitive shooters like your Valorants and the like if you install Windows on it for some reason. So let's talk about TDP for a second here. TDP is basically a useless metric, and you should not use it for any kind of comparisons whatsoever in any serious way in the slightest, because every single manufacturer, even sometimes from product line to product line, have different numbers to come to this TDP value. This TDP number is purely marketing, so that way they can say that their number is better on the box, and the math you use to get there is complete bollocks. The only thing that you can really use by this number is to glance at it and is one more efficient than the other? But even that leaves a lot on the table. Like, what counts as efficiency? Are we talking about power efficiency? Are we talking about heat efficiency? Is it able to ramp up faster and spend less time doing waste work? None of that you're able to tell from this number. All you can tell is that one number is smaller than the other. Now, we are able to do some guesstimations because we know that 30 watts goes into the chip, blah, blah, blah. Without having the hardware on hand, TDP is a useless metric. So don't even waste your time here. So let's talk about the GPU. A lot of people are saying that the GPU is a mobile 7600. A lot of people are saying it's a discrete. I've literally seen the word discrete GPU, which let me remind you, that's the form factor that we're dealing with. So no, it's not a discrete GPU. It might be a dedicated GPU. It might be a piece of silicon that's on the board, but it is not a discrete GPU. There is a difference. Words matter. Use them properly. The truth of the matter is that it's somewhere in between. 7600 is a rough ballpark, and as a rough ballpark, it's a decent enough metric, but it's not quite actually a 7600. It has less CUs and less max core frequency than the desktop 7600, so it's been neutered at least in some ways. It also has less CUs, but more max core frequency than the PS5. It's a newer process, so it'll be more power efficient, which if what we saw on the CPU side holds true, they're likely potentially juicing it here too. But given that the GPU is going to be the more power hungry and the more heat generating portion of this build, I'm willing to bet that they're going to be conservative on the GPU. It's kind of up in the air, to be honest with you. We know that it's generally going to perform around a 7600 and also generally perform around the PS5's GPU. The questions come from it being RDNA 3 versus RDNA 2, because RDNA 3 is a new architecture, so there can be pipeline improvements there that speed things up. RDNA 3 has better RT than RDNA 2, but RDNA 2 on the PS5 had custom RT hardware from what I remember. I don't remember it being anything all that fancy, and it kind of sucks, but it is there. So that will change the performance differential. So all of this means until we actually get the thing in hand and we figure out if Valve just like juiced the thing and doubled the voltage to make it go crazy, or if they're trying to be more conservative, which in a small form factor quiet box that you put under your TV, they're more likely to do. We just won't know for sure. But 7600 is a useful ballpark, and also PS5 is a general ballpark. Now, because of the way that these numbers work, it actually we can pretty much predict these performance profiles for this hardware. Everything that we're seeing here is pointing towards the Steam Machine being a box that kicks absolute ass at 1080p 60. It is the box for 1080p 60. Basically, any game that are going to throw at it that's currently out, for the most part, should run on this thing at 1080p 60 with no big deal. You probably would do higher graphics settings. 1440p is going to be where you start to run into problems. You're going to need some upscaling to hit 60 FPS, most likely. If you're okay with a 30 FPS cap, you can probably do 1440p 30, maybe a little bit lower detail, maybe a little bit lower textures, but you could do it. And then if you wanted to ball out and do 4K, you could probably go pretty aggressive with your scaling and hit 4K 60. It'll look like ass, but you can do it. And then if you're playing less demanding games like I almost said Star Citizen. Yeah, less demanding Star Citizen. Stardew Valley or like Minecraft or whatever, you can probably hit 4K in it, no problem. But they have to be lighter games for that. Which is actually another problem that I have with the Steam Machine's marketing, is that they've completely blown their load on that too. But again, talking about all of this, all of that performance profile, that sounds really familiar to another device that we're all familiar with, right? Like, that sounds really familiar to the PlayStation 5s. In fact, you can even see under this image on the PlayStation 5 GPU that they didn't include on the 7600 for some reason, you can see that it recommends 1920 by 1080, perfect. 2560 by 1440 might have some problems. 3840 by 2160, you're gonna have problems. So we know exactly how this thing is going to perform for the most part. Which leads us to the price question. We keep coming back to the price question. Where is the price? Because the price is going to determine how many units this thing sells. It's going to determine how big the market is. It's going to determine basically the future of Steam hardware. Because if this thing flops for a second time, Valve may not try a third time, because they've tried to introduce a Steam computer twice, and it's been a disaster both times. Or this will be a success, and this will be a nonsense video that gets me nowhere and makes me look like an idiot on the internet. Either way. Now, it's kind of hard to talk about price without talking about some other econ and business concepts. So we got to talk about things like margin, loss leaders. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff. And I do need to explain these, but I'm going to try to explain it on a surface level because I know, me included, most of the time whenever we look at things like how business money works, you think of something like this and it's just this convoluted chart that's gross and disgusting and you have no idea which way's up. We're not going to do that here. We're going to take things very simple. I'm going to run us through how much the PS5 theoretically, supposedly cost to build, what Sony was selling it for, and how they intended to make their money off of it. And we're also going to take those same lessons and we're going to apply it to the Steam Deck because we know that the Steam Deck parts are sold in order for repair. So we can look at that and we can reverse the numbers and try to figure things out. And also it's important to look at the Steam Deck because it is Valve's machine. So they are going to take a lot of the lessons they learned from building the Steam Deck and move it towards the Steam machine. So when the PS5 was first released, Bloomberg put out this article about the bill of materials, BOM costs, which is basically just the physical cost of the goods, like all the plastic and metals and stuff that it takes to actually make the thing. Sony would go around and whenever they sold these wholesale, they would be losing $80 on every single PS5 digital unit that was sold and $50 on every single PS5 disc unit that was sold. So what does that mean? What is wholesale? What blah, 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 all of this confusing stuff. Let's break down how retail works real quick. David, my friend, if you are watching this, I'm very, very, very sorry for the bastardization that I'm about to do to your favorite subject. I apologize. I mean no disgrace to econ. I'm an idiot. I'm just here making a YouTube video for fun. I'm also going to read bullet points on this one so I can just make sure that I get through this fast enough. So I apologize if I sound kind of monotonous. So whenever you make a good to sell, you need to sell it for enough money that you make back what it costs to make. And you also want to make a little bit over that so that way you have more money in the bank after selling the good than you did before making it. Yeah, obviously, right? Like you want to make money. You don't want to just set your money on fire by doing things. Retail or other storefronts like Amazon or whatever, they also need to make money off of the things that they sell. So there's this concept called wholesale, where you as the manufacturer sell your good to a retailer for reduced pricing that you could get on your own in exchange for the massive warehouse stock that they have, in exchange for the massive exposure that they have. They often have, hundreds of thousands of people coming in the store every day, or in the case of Amazon, hundreds of thousands of people scrolling every day. So your audience, your potential for sales will 10x, 100x, even though you're selling for less individual dollar amount per unit. So retailers obviously have an incentive in selling cheaper to make goods, because if they're cheaper to make, then they make more money overall. They can crank up their sell price and they just print money basically, right? Manufacturers obviously have that same incentive, but in reverse. Their incentive is in making the thing as cheaply as possible or selling it wholesale for as high as possible. Obviously, if you're trying to sell something at a very high wholesale markup and you're also, as the manufacturer, capping what the resale price can be, if you're squishing the retailer too much, they may not want to sell your good because there's just no money to be made in it. There's no point. You're wasting their time. The manufacturer also has to, they have a bunch of costs that they have to think about. They have rent in their office, they have power, they have employees they need to hire, they have research and development they need to do, they have lawyers they need to pay, like all that stuff. You have to make sure that you're selling enough units and you're selling them at a high enough price and it's cheap enough to make that you're able to keep your business afloat. And the retailers have to worry about all this stuff too. They have their own retail space. If they're Amazon, they have servers they need to maintain and they have workers that they need to pay and so on and so forth. That's where things get interesting. Retailers will typically the retail goal, like the golden number that you're going to hear at retail, is 30%. That's not a universal rule. That's not true in all industries. It's not even true for all products. It's not even true for all products in the same product line. But 30% is the ballpark number that a retailer will be going for to get their margin. Consumer electronics typically fall on the lower end of that. So you're typically going to be closer on the 10% side of things, just because there is so much research and capital and raw metals and all the other stuff that go into a consumer electronics product. They are just more expensive to make. And as a result, you just can't charge as much because consumers are used to, cheap TVs. And if you start charging $5,000 for a TV that yesterday used to cost $500, people aren't going to buy it. Now, there is a market for $5,000 TVs, but that $5,000 TV in this analogy would now become $50,000. So you got to be careful with your pricing. You have to be conscious of your audience, because if you price things too high, the people who would buy it won't be able to. And now you see why the dance gets complicated very quickly. Now, in order to deal with the margin overhead and stuff like this, a lot of consumer electronics will go the model of the razor blade, or put another way, they're a loss leader. So what does that mean? Well, a loss leader is something that you sell intending to lose money on. It is a doorbuster. It is something to get people to come to you. And once you have them in the store and they're looking at things, you might be able to convince them to pick up something else that you actually will make money on. So to relate this back to games, if you buy a PS5, Sony's losing $50 on that. So they're just hoping that you buy enough games that they make enough money on the back end that they actually start to make money off your PlayStation 5 purchase. It makes sense, right? Like, you buy a controller, you buy a few disc games with your PS5. Hey, they're making a little money. Everyone's happy, right? The retailer gets more happy in that regard because even though the console itself, they're making barely any money on, whenever they're selling games, if they're getting 30% off that, they're sitting happy. They want you to buy more games. That also means that they don't get any money from digital games. So that's also a point of contention because the manufacturers want to go digital because they make more money that way. And the retailers are pissed off about that because they want their money. Okay. That was a lot of yapping. I hope we're all still here. Let's take a coffee break. Now that we know how retail works, I think it's helpful to break down how much money Sony actually makes on the PS5. Remember, we have two SKUs here. We've got a digital unit without a disc drive, so it can only play digital games. That's on sale for $399. We also have a version that can take discs as well as digital games and is on sale for $499. So if these cost $430 and $450 to make respectively, that means that Sony is actually losing $80 every time they sell one of these PS5 digitals to a retailer, and they're losing $50 every time they sell it onto a retailer. Now, that means that the retailer, because if they're paying $430 for a digital console and they're selling it at $499, or I'm sorry, if Sony is selling it at $350 and they're selling it at $399, that means they're only making $30 on the digital console. So it's really not worth it to them. They want you to buy the disc console. But the math gets really funny. So watch this. So remember how we were talking about the actual percentages of margin. So retail has a 30% margin. So if we assume that this is a $70 PS5 game, because that's what the price they were going for brand new in 2020 was, 30% of $70 is $21. So that means that every time you go to Best Buy and you buy a PS5 game for $70, Best Buy makes 21 of that $70 right in their pocket. Now, there's other people who get a slice of that pie too. So Sony, as the platform holder, because they make the system, they make the APIs, they make the graphics, they make the storefront, they make everything. They charge these numbers start to get variable because it's all individual business decisions and what their negotiations and contracts are. But general rule of thumb is 10 to 15% for the platform holder. Sony's getting 10% for every game sold. That's $7. So Sony starts to make money that way. Now, where it gets interesting is the publisher. The publisher and the developers splits are kind of attached to one another in a lot of cases. Most of the time, the way that it works is that publisher gets all of the money and then the developer will get royalties from that money. It's like a certain percentage kickback based on a bunch of different stuff and like what costs were to make and post-marketing money and all that stuff. So they do some funny accounting there. I'm not going to account for that funny accounting in this because it's not relevant. All of that 50 to 60% chunk that's left, that's just going to the publisher and then they can do whatever they want to after that. So that's how it works out. 60% to the publisher, 10% to Sony, 30% to the retailer. With all that said, also remember that Sony makes games. They don't just make the box. They also make games. So how does that math work? Well, it's actually funny because if you are doing a retail game, that means that Sony then gets the publisher portion, assuming they published it. So if they publish it and develop it and sell it on their console, then they get to triple dip basically. Now, obviously, because of publishing it, they do have some costs with marketing and all that stuff. So it's not pure profit for them, but it is, they basically get to keep all of it. So they're now in the neighborhood of keeping something closer to 60 to 65 to even 70% of the total disc volume, which we'll just call it an average. We'll put it right in the middle. And we'll say that for a first party game, that is a disc game, it's going to be $42 per disc. If it happens to be on the higher end, it'll be $45.50, whatever, $46. So $42 to $46. That's pretty decent change. Now, it gets even crazier when you remember that there are digital games. The way that a third-party digital game works is that because Sony is the retailer and they're also the platform holder, they get 40%. 40 to 50%, again, it depends on the deal. Pretty wild swing in profitability from disc to digital, huh? Now you understand why all the console manufacturers are crazy about digital games and why they want to push digital only, because they just make so much goddamn money off of it. It's disgusting. And the final actually gross number that I want to talk about is a first party Sony digital game, because that means that they are pocketing 80 to 90%. They basically take the entire pie, because they make the game, they market the game, they publish the game, they have the storefront, and they're also the retailer. So they just get to take the entire pie. Now, at the end of the day, they basically only profit 80 to 90%, because 10 to 20% of that does need to go to the developers. So in this case, I did remove that because everything else is literally Sony. But again, 80 to 90% profit margin on something that you're selling for $70 is actually insane. So now that we have all the math, we can do a little bit more math, and we can actually figure out exactly how many games you need to purchase for Sony to start making money off of you. So if you have a digital only console, you only need to buy 3 games for Sony to start making profit off of you. And that's third-party games. So not a high barrier to entry. It's actually a pretty good business move for Sony. Like, all you have to do is buy 2 games. Think of, like, basically everybody you can think of that has a game system has at least 2 games for it. And the math gets even funnier when it's a first-party game. If it's a first-party digital game, then you only need to sell 2 games and then pure profit. If you have a disc, that changes the math quite a bit, because not only is your base price more, not only is it more expensive for Sony to produce, retailers are clawing at you more. So it actually takes 8 third-party games that are on a disc in order for Sony to break even and start making money. The math on the digital side is actually weirder than the digital console, which like I've checked these numbers and they're right. It's just funny how it all works out. So on the disc console, Sony actually starts making a profit after 2 digital games. If you're doing a first-party digital game, you can buy just one full-price game, and they will start to make money off of you. So now that we have all these numbers, it's pretty easy to visualize how Sony makes money, right? So now I want to talk about traditional PC OEMs, because Valve has gone on record to state that they are not following the console model. They are not doing loss leader. They are going to price it more like a computer. So what does that look like? Well, if you're diving into Q1 financial records for HP, it's incredibly boring, and you want to take a cheese grater to your nutsack. But it does kind of give you some better numbers. So your big incumbents, your Dell, HP, Lenovo, like the big boys, especially the ones that have established enterprise segments, they're going to be closer to the 20% side of margin, just because of their massive scale. Especially on the enterprise side, and especially if they are going more for power users. So like on the Lenovo side, for example, because whenever you start to get to that $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 price point, you are just kind of making money. So obviously the scale tips a little bit there, and business deals make it tip too, and blah, blah, blah. If you're a more boutique builder, so you're something like a system integrator, so like an iBuyPower or a Starforge or like one of those types, or you're somebody who's Falcon Northwest would be a great example of a boutique PC builder. Alienware pre Dell acquisition, like those kind of guys. You're probably closer to the 10% margin on those, just because a lot of times you're dealing more with off the shelf parts. You're not going to manufacturing and getting things done yourself. You don't really have economies of scale. Sometimes it's literally just a dude just sitting in a garage working on things. So if we take all of those factors in, we know that PCs are typically 10 to 20% margin. Then, okay, this is easy. We can look at the current sale price of the PS5, tack X amount of money for what the price increase was for the PS5 from launch day to now, and then tack 10% on top of that for the margin, and we have our sale price, right? That's super easy. So that means that, okay, so let's look it up. So PS5 now is currently selling for $599 digital, $639 physical. So let's just add $100 to the PS5's base cost. So $599 for the base cost for the Steam machine, and then let's add 10% to cover the margin. $650. Easy, right? No. No, not at all. You're entirely wrong. You forgot to include tariffs and the AI nonsense and everything else that's causing our life to descend into a capitalistic hellhole right now. We have to face facts that the tariffs are very complicated for business. regardless of what your opinion on the tariffs are, whether they're right or wrong or whatever, the fact of the matter is that if they change rapidly, it's hard for businesses to decide how much money they're going to make. Because if you wake up one day and it's 50%, and you wake up the next day and it's 200%, you wake up the next day and it's 65%, you have no idea what your cost of operating is going to be that day. So you have to build that into your price forecast, or else you're just going to waste money, and then eventually you're going to go out of business. So regardless of whatever your thoughts are, it's bad for business, which means that it's going to be bad for the consumers long term. On top of that, we then also have to deal with Sam Altman just saying the magic words RAM, and then factories just dumping 60% of their stock directly into his lap. So that makes scarcity being a thing, first off, is going to make prices increase because of supply and demand. It's a basic economy rule. But on top of that, like, God, there's so many factors here. I could spend forever. Like, I haven't even talked about the Strait of Hormuz or anything else that's going on right now. That's going to cause it is causing energy prices to spike globally, which if energy is more expensive, then it's just going to cost more to make things. Like if it costs $20 to run your machine today and it costs $40 the next day, that's an extra cost that you then have to factor into your final price, right? All of this comes together, and all of this does absolutely impact pricing. But the question is how. And we have a pretty good example of the how. It's the Steam Deck pricing that just recently got announced. There was a massive fucking price increase on the Steam Deck OLEDs. And it's not good. It's really bad. These prices are genuinely bad. But it does give us some insight into what we're looking at for the Steam machine. So what I did was I compiled together a matrix of all of the parts that are available in iFixit. iFixit is the official parts provider for the Steam Deck, and these parts are sourced for the most part directly from Valve's supply lines. So they are genuine parts. They are the same parts that are going into actual Steam Decks, and they are obviously sold on to the consumer, which gives us some interesting math, because that means that iFixit is working as the retailer in this regard, and on top of that, Valve is working as the wholesaler. Now, there is some funnier math that you have to do with these, because every time that you wanted to, for example, sell a replacement trackpad or a thumbstick or whatever, right? That's normally a part that would go into a fully assembled, fully working Steam machine or Steam Deck that Valve can then sell on and make their money that way. But if you're selling the parts, then you have to increase the parts' individual value a lot more to make your individual margins. And then on top of that, the retailer then has to take your wholesale price and 30% on top of that in order to make their money. So looking at these prices, a lot of these prices actually paint a pretty good picture. A lot of them seem to be pretty realistic in terms of what the parts actually cost. I have some caveats here that we're going to talk about. First ones that I want to call out, there are some parts that are only available used or not sold at all. Motherboard is not sold at all, which is really one that I would love to see, because that will give us chip costs, but they're not going to do that. The LCD has its heat pipe and its speakers were used parts only. They were certified refurbished parts. But I didn't feel like it was fair to compare those in here. I did include it, but I don't think it's a fair comparison, because the used part and the new part is selling for the same price. So let's ignore that one. Also, the SSDs are just generic Micron replacements. They are the same specs, so they work fine, but they are just a generic off-the-shelf part that they've stocked. And it's also interesting because these prices here are 100% pre-tariff pricing and pre-shortage pricing. And we can confirm that, actually. Let me go ahead and we're going to go to Amazon right now. So I'm just searching for 256, 2230 NVMe just to see what's there. So as we can see, $93, 256, 512 for 140. Here's a Samsung, which looks like it's pulled out of a working computer. So that's a used part, $65. So it looks like the $65 price mark is probably before tariffs. So these are old stock that are just sitting around, or these are used parts that are pulled from a working computer, which is arguably worse, selling that for what was full retail. Assholes. But you can tell that these are like janky, cheap, shitty, like Chinese parts that are just trying to come in and capitalize on things. Cause like, look at like how bad these logos are and how bad they're stretched, but also they're $92. So these are absolutely post price increases. And these are more in line with what I would expect to see nowadays. So 140, 65. Yeah, we can sit here, we can look at all these prices, but this proves right away that some of these prices are at least pre-tariff, which makes the math hard because the math that we're looking at here isn't actually the real math that's happening. So it's, you kind of have to take some of this with a grain of salt sometimes. But looking at some of these, so like the LCD pricing for the LCD Steam Deck, so we can see it's $90, so super reasonable price. If you take your 30% out of that, and then let's say that Valve also has a 30% markup on that, 10 to $20 per screen, that sounds about right. That's vaguely in the ballpark. Same thing with the fans. Like they're small, they're high energy, they're kinetic, so they do take a lot of manufacturing process. They're high precision parts, so they are more expensive. But again, take 30%, take 60% out of these parts, and you're roughly in the ballpark. For they're still marked up a little bit, but you're able to do some rough napkin math with these like way easier. The one that's interesting to me though that I also want to call out is the battery. So the battery for the LCD is $129 compared to the significantly cheaper OLED battery, which is larger. So what that tells me is that the LCD battery is a post-tariff item. Post-tariff, post-price increase, post-manufacturing shortage, whatever. It's a new batch, and the OLED batteries that are sitting here are probably original stock that were paid for way back in the day before all of this. That's why they're so much cheaper. So it's kind of cool seeing the economics of what is actually happening in the world manifesting right in front of us. And we're just talking about these stupid video game consoles that let me yell at people and call them slurs on the internet. It's incredible. Let's talk about Moore's Law is dead. So while we're talking about the bill of materials, I want to be very careful with what I'm about to say, and I want to clarify, and I want to caveat every word that's about to come out of my mouth. I have not looked at the original source here, and the main reason for that is because this was apparently just said in a podcast episode. I did not really want to sit down for a 2-hour podcast and listen for the 2 minutes that they were talking about this. So if anybody can confirm one way or the other what numbers they're actually talking about here, that will change a lot of this math. I more just wanted to bring it up because people are using this as like a Bible whenever they're talking online. I see it on Twitter a lot. I see it on Reset Era whenever I come across that. Like I see it on Reddit. So I just wanted to put this out there that I'm pretty sure these numbers were napkin math. I'm pretty sure this was just a ballpark estimation and is not actually grounded in reality. And I say that for a few very particular reasons. And I just... Again, I'm trying to be very careful with what I'm saying here. Please do not go after and attack these guys. They did nothing wrong here, because I'm firmly in the belief that this was just napkin math speculation. So do not hang people over this. This was them just guessing. But there are some flaws in these guesses. So let's tackle a few of them. First thing is system RAM is the same between the two systems. We know for a fact that cannot be the case because the Steam Machine has 50% more RAM in it and also has 2 different sets of RAM. So just that's just a logistical challenge that will make things more expensive. There's some weird numbers with the battery power system in the Steam Deck versus the Steam Machine. The Steam Machine's numbers actually look fairly accurate. It's probably going to be less than that because it looks like they're just using Chicom Chinese power supplies, which is, fine. But I have no idea why the Steam Decks is so expensive. It's a 256 gig Steam Deck, so I don't know if they're comparing. Well, if it's 256, it has to be LCD, which would then mean that the display is $35. That's a little aggressive, in my opinion. That is probably what Valve is charging iFixit wholesale for their screens, if I had to guess. So that seems kind of high. So, but that might be where his source of like, oh, this is how much the part costs, because he knows somebody at iFixit, or he just asked them and they told him. Like, I don't know. I don't know the provenance of these numbers. But I wanted to put that caveat out there that there are some things in here that don't seem correct. Like, okay, like actually another good example is input devices and controller, $35. Well, there are some SKUs of the Steam Deck that don't have the controller. So that's what I'm talking about. Like, this seems like it's kind of lopsided because it's picking an old model that's not produced anymore. So we have unknown provenance of when these part costs were, and also comparing it to one of the SKUs that's the more expensive SKU. Like, you see what I mean? Like, it's lopsided. So it to me reads like somebody just doing napkin math. I would love some clarifications, but given all the math that we've been doing in this episode so far, I don't believe these numbers. If I find anybody being mean to them, I will personally send Gabe Newell to come ram a statue of a Steam Machine up your pee hole. Okay, we've got all that out of the way. I'm done being serious. Let's talk about the Steam Deck price increases. So I'm going to compare all of the models. We have 3 LCD models that are no longer sold. We have 2 OLED models that are still currently sold. So I thought it was helpful to go through and compare how long it took the price changes to happen on both models, or I'm sorry, all 5 models, I guess, technically, both product lines. And then we can kind of extrapolate from there. And then we have some examples that are pre-tariff, pre-AI apocalypse, and post. And then we can kind of use that math in addition to the BOM cost to extrapolate things. So LCD, when it first launched, it launched at the absolute base price of a 64 gig unit at $399, $225, 2022. That's actually the model that I bought here because I planned on putting my own drive in it. So cut forward 2.5 years, 2 years, 9 months later, the very, very, very last 64 gig model was sold 11/27/2024 for the price of $349. So over a almost 3 year span, it lost $50 off the price. So we have a pretty good ballpark for what the base cost of a Steam Deck is going to be. It's $350. If they sell it for much lower than that, they're likely losing money. And we can confirm this by looking at the next model. So the mid tier was the LCD 256, retailed for $529 when it first came out, eventually dropped to $399. So Valve had a price in mind that they wanted to aggressively cut it to. They got to that point. So which again leads credence to the whole, they are not making a whole lot of money at $399. In fact, I meant to mention this earlier. I guess I skipped that slide. Valve has actually, when the Steam Deck first came out, they did publicly say that hitting the $399 price point was extremely painful. So, and that's one reason why the 64 gig is an eMMC. It was everything they could possibly do to save money and hit that price point. And also why the LCD 64 gig was discontinued as soon as it was, because they just wanted, that wasn't the experience they wanted, but it's what they had to do to hit the price point. So $399, $349 floor for the base price, and then the SSD and the different screens make the difference going up the stack from there. Premium model LCD 512, $649, eventually sold for $449 on 1/7/2026, which was the last time an LCD model was sold brand new by Valve. So all of that said, lost $50, lost $130, lost $200 over about almost a 4-year span. So how does the OLED compare to these numbers? How much money did we save on the OLEDs? Nah, just kidding. It's more expensive now. So the OLED launched on 11/16/2023 for $549 for the 512, $649 for the 1 terabyte. They are now selling for $789 and $949 respectively. So in 2 years and 6 months, the OLEDs actually gained at least $240 or at most $300. So what this actually means is that over a span of, yeah, well, we can safely say 4 years, a little bit more than 4 years, the absolute cheapest model swung all the way up to a swing of $440 additional dollars. So at the very absolute cheapest entry point, $349, to now the current cheapest entry point, $649. That's a massive swing. That's a massive swing. And consumers 100% will feel that. I would also like to point out, because this math is so funny, like I just find it hysterical, like when I realized this. So if 2026, you went back to the LCD 512 and you bought 2 units right then, right before they were discontinued, that would be cheaper than buying one of the OLEDs nowadays. Two full computers with 512 gigabytes of storage each, 16 gigs of RAM. And it's cheaper than one of them nowadays. Like that's just how insane the price increase is. So pricing on everything is bad right now. Pricing on electronics is bad. Pricing on food is bad. Pricing, everything is bad right now. It's a great sign of the economy whenever you go on TikTok and people are committing check fraud against Chase because of an infinite money glitch. Like that's not a sign of a healthy economy. Like, I'm sorry, it's just not. It's bad. We all know it's bad. And I am calling it right now. The Steam Machine will be worse. This is going to be the first large scale, high profile tech launch that we've experienced post tariff, post AI, post nonsense. And this is going to be this is the new normal. I hate to use that phrase, but this is the new normal. Expect this going forward. We're going to have $2,500, $3,000 iPhones in the future. One thing that I do really want to talk about before I reveal my numbers, I've seen people online range from as low as $400 because they're completely out to lunch and they expect the console model and they're just putting no thought into this whatsoever. And they're just, Like some people, they just like say things that I've also seen people say $1,500, which is absolute doomerism, absolute gloom. Like that, there is not a world like Valve will cancel the product line at that point if it costs $1,500. Like it's insane. So I put a lot of thought in these numbers. I've really put a lot of thought into these, and I'm pretty sure that these numbers are what Valve is going to do. So the important thing to keep in mind is that these are educated guesses. I have no insider information. I am a dude on the internet. Unfortunately, I am a YouTuber, so my opinion's even more stupid compared to the average person. I'm just a dude who likes tech. I just talk. Like I'm doing all this for fun. Like this is just something that I found interesting. So please don't get excited over this. Don't take this as gospel. It's not. I pray to God that I'm wrong about this, to be honest with you. I pray to God that I'm too high, but we'll see. Also, while we're talking about not getting excited, don't get excited for Steam Next Fest. Don't get excited for Computex. Don't get excited for E3. Valve is not going to announce this at any of those events. I promise you. Valve has more than enough fuck you money. They're just going to put a fucking blog post on Steam, and then they're going to upload a YouTube video, and that's going to be it. Hi, Editing James here. Summer Games Fest was yesterday. Guess what didn't get announced there? I guess it is time for the grand reveal. Ignore the fact that I was using tinfoil to censor this. It was the quickest thing that I could grab, that I could shape exactly how I needed it to, and then I didn't shape it exactly how I needed it to. All right, I have decided that I'm going to blur this, and then in editing, I will reveal it. Okay, this is kind of a weird, awkward angle, but whatever. All right, so we're gonna move that bus. So these are my numbers. These are the numbers that I think the Steam Machine is going to land at. You'll notice that I have two sets. I have a plan A and a plan B. Plan A is what I think Valve is desperately trying to hit, because this is like the best case scenario for them. Plan B is the, oh shit, things are just horrifically bad and we just have to tank it and we just have to accept the bad PR numbers. So the way that this matrix works is, again, remember, we have 4 SKUs. We've got 512, 1 terabyte, and then those same models with controllers. So that's what I did, is I did 512 controller, 1 terabyte controller. So 512 unit, I believe, is going to start at $9.99. I think that for a lot of reasons. One, if you go beyond that, it's going to start the doomer cycle. There's going to be bad news about this no matter what we do. There's no way to avoid that. But $9.99 will soften the blow a little bit. It'll make it so that way they can say that it's not quite $1,000. That's going to have some psychology benefits. You won't see it on the internet. People will still bitch, but I guarantee you'll see it on launch day when people buy the fucker. Controller, the controller itself sells standalone for $100, so $80 I think is a goodwill gesture towards people to show that, like, hey, like, we're trying to give you a deal, we're trying to make things right here. And also this lines up with Valve's previous pricing on the Steam Deck, because on the lower end model they did an odd number, like 79, 49, whatever it was, I don't remember. But they did that so that way they could get it as close to the, normally in retail, you just kind of round up to the nearest number because most people don't pay attention to it. Like when was the last time you looked at that $.99 on any sales tag, on any price tag, right? So I think that Valve might do the goodwill thing and they might knock $20 off just to try to make PR a little nicer. And then we'll do the same thing. 1 terabyte coming in at $11.99. So why is that one so expensive? Why is that one not $10.99? My thought process there was Valve was going to be looking to make some extra money off of the unit in order to justify the entire run, right? You see this in cell phones all the time. Like if you jump up from 128 gigs to 256 gigs, it's another $100. You want 512, it's another $100. Like it's always $100, right? And the point of that is just so that way they have more margin. So I imagine that they'll want to stack the margin on this one. It could come in at $11.49. I could also see that as kind of splitting the difference between getting more margin out of it and being nice to your consumers. But I'm pretty sure they're going to come in at $11.99, and then they're going to do the same thing with the controller, so $12.79. Now, the bad plan, the everything is bad, tariffs are out of control, AI has eaten up our memory supply, we're going to get these units and we have no idea when we're going to be able to make more, like it's going to be a complete disaster. That's these numbers. So these are the Valve has given up all pretense and they like just need to make as much money as possible in order to keep this thing on life support. And that's 10, 11, 12, 13. I think if you go above $13.99 for the highest end model, like you're once you hit $1,500 for this thing at any level on any SKU, even if it's with bundles, I think you've lost the plot and you've lost your audience. So they need to hover. Realistically speaking, they need to be lower if they want to sell volume. What we have to accept the fact that this is not going to be a volume seller at this point. This is going to be a fairly boutique piece of gear that not a lot of people are going to have. We need to treat it more like a Valve Index rather than a Quest 3. So yeah, that's it. That's my numbers. We did it. Mission accomplished. I'm really curious to see what everyone else's thoughts are. If you think I'm close to the mark, if you think I'm completely out to lunch, I'm really curious to see what everyone's going to say. Again, I feel like I am high, and I also feel like this is like Valve doesn't have much of a choice here, because you have to consider what the future is going to be like. If prices are going to increase in the future, they want to set a price now that's high, let the impact wear off and people get used to it long term, versus having to raise prices after the fact. Raising prices after the fact is a net negative 100% of the time. So hopefully I'm right here. Hopefully, no, you know what? Hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully this thing comes in at $800, like, which is where I originally thought it was going to land in November. I would love to. At $800, I might even entertain the idea of one. Probably not, but if it was like $600, that's a no brainer right there. But as discussed, physically not possible. I don't think at this point. So, all right, guys. Let me know what your thoughts are. Leave your prices down in the comments. I'm curious what everyone thinks everything's going to be. And I guess we will see if I'm right or not. Good luck to everybody who wants one.